you very much, Saeed.
Questions from this side? Any questions that weren't asked or weren't answered? Okay.
There are no further questions from the audience, so thank you very much. Oh.
Okay, hold on.
Okay, so we'll continue here. So first of all, the second part we'll talk more about the event itself and also how people are using OpenStack. Actually took a few slides and few slides from an interesting report from the user survey, which I think highlights some interesting insights about it.
Just 1 second. Raphael, how is Alex joining? Is he going to be joining after Nati, or is he going to be, is he on the line, and is he going to be speaking, supporting Nati?
Alex is actually with us in the conference room, and I'll send him the dial-in number, so he'll be with us for a Q&A as well during Nati's presentation.
Well, I am actually, can people hear me? This is Alex.
Yes, we can.
Alex.
Freedland
Excellent.
from Mirantis.
Hi there. Yeah.
Well, hi, everyone. I don't see how many of them are here, but it's good to virtually meet all of you.
So it's 27 people in the online portion, and how many people are you guys in Israel, Sharon?
Yeah, about the same. Yeah, about the same. So we have a nice 50 people participating. This is great.
Excellent.
Great. Okay, so Nati's going to present his slides, and Alex, feel free if you want to support Nati, and then afterwards you can do your own run-through as well.
Sure. No, I'll just Nati, you go ahead, and I'll just add some color in some places where, I mean, I've seen your slides. They're quite comprehensive. So.
Excellent. So again, thanks, Alex, for joining us from Paris right now, and Alex is from Mirantis, and basically I'll start with the general sentiment. And one of the things that you've seen in today's presentation is there's a lot of features in the infrastructure itself. I'll talk more about it. And one of the things that you'll see is why people are using OpenStack is actually because of a lot of those features that you can't really go to Amazon and ask for those features. You can't really go to Azure and ask for those features, neither to Google and ask for those features for all the networking, for supporting NFV. They will just tell you, go ahead, go to hell. Not in that language, but that's pretty much the idea. And there is a tight relationship between the level of control of the infrastructure and innovation. And one of the things that I think came out of this meeting is that in a lot of previous meetings, and some of you have been there before, there was many people coming to see if OpenStack is real. Is it going to happen? And there was a lot of questions about it until recently. And I think that in this summit, we were coming, I think a bunch of us, 7 people I think we were from GigaSpaces there, and we came back all very enthusiastic, much more than all previous events, with one message, I think one voice that was echoed through all the people. And by the way, that wasn't the case before. And it was really that. It wasn't people asking whether OpenStack is going to be real. It's people who are already using OpenStack and asking how to build it in production. And that's the main change that I've seen. And you'll see that also reflected within the user survey itself. But I think that's the main message here, that we've, I think, passed a very important milestone with that 10th release of OpenStack from a usage perspective. Coming back to, again, Saeed's presentation, the main reason is innovation. Not cost, but innovation. And that's an important item because most people look at OpenStack as a way to cut costs. Cutting cost is one aspect. I would assure you that initially you wouldn't really cut costs. It's actually going to cost you more to implement OpenStack versus a lot of other solutions, including public cloud. So cutting costs may come at some layer once you get the infrastructure ready down the road. And I'm sure Alex has things to add to that. Alex, do you have anything to add to that point?
Well, no, I completely agree. Innovation and agility are the two main reasons why people are using OpenStack. I think agility is probably number one, but agility as a way to foster innovation within the organization. That's number one. And number two is a point that, to your previous comment, Nati, not only people are coming and they're essentially not, it's no longer a question, but it's a statement that OpenStack is ready for use. Also, the community continues to grow. It's the largest event we have, not by much, but it's the largest event. But what's interesting is about 70% of the people in the Paris summit never been to OpenStack summits before. And that's the reason why the foundation does it in different geographies every time, because they want to get people from other geographies join. And so it means that out of almost 5,000 people who joined, more than 3,000 people are new people, and they're coming to learn about this. And it's not a question of if, it's a question of when they're going to be, joining, or they're already using OpenStack. So this is, again, very refreshing for us to see.
And that gets me to the next slide, the main themes for the release itself. I think we covered the features of each element and block in the component, and some people may get lost in the details of, what do I actually get with general release, and where OpenStack is really going. So I wasn't trying to actually go to the feature, but actually give you the broader perspective of where OpenStack is going. And I'm sure Alex, who started the foundation, can also highlight some of the future direction that OpenStack is taking. So I'll start with those three themes. And when we talk about benefits, I'm not going to touch too much about it, just give my own personal perspective into that. The main thing is that I think it was quite evident that by the case studies themselves, and again, if you compare case studies in each OpenStack, you'll see the growth, you'll see the level of adoption, but also the level of usage, and the company was using OpenStack. And I think the list of companies here is pretty impressive by itself, and each company has actually taken OpenStack not just as an experimental tool, but as a strategic. Some of them are even public about it. I think eBay has been very, very public about what they're doing, but it was also interesting to see industries like banks talking at these events. Wells Fargo was the main one. Banks who are usually, the ones that look at the entire data center as something very secretive and usually don't talk about it. By the adoption of open source, they're also changing their own culture, and that's also interesting. NFV in itself is a way of not just changing a technology, it's also a culture change that is brought with that open source movement into also another industry, which is telco in this case, which was also very, very secretive, very, very, it's my way or the highway kind of approach, and very much focused on specialization. And all of a sudden they realized that if they really want to move fast, they can't really do it without working with the community.
Nati, before you go, let me just maybe add a couple of words here. So these are the customers and the the use cases that were shared publicly at the summit. But if you look at the actual users and who are maybe not making public presentations, but we're seeing some very large adoption numbers. So, for example, you're showing Orange is the only telco, but just from our own experience, just the telcos that are our customers that are public about using OpenStack at scale are companies like AT&T and PacNet, which is a large Asian. There's Tata Telecom, which is pretty public about it, and Sprint is actually using it, and they're a Red Hat customer, not ours, but they're also pretty public about it. There are also some large telcos that are doing it that are not using it, but also there were Vodafone and Telefonica and the Dutch telco, I forgot what they're called, and all of those already have pilots and they have large plans, and so telco is actually one of the huge adopters of OpenStack, both for their internal clouds for innovation and also for NFV. And of course, a very public use case is Ericsson, that is in fact taking OpenStack to all of their customers in the next quarter. And I guess we're in the middle of that too, but this is, again, so just to reinforce the point that Nati is making, this alone is $1 trillion industry that is up for disruption, and OpenStack is going to be smack in the middle of it.
Excellent. We're just working also on some logistics here, and hopefully we'll get them sorted out. Thanks, Alex. So with that, I'll reference to one of the case studies that was, I think, remembered out of this summit, and that's the BMW case study. Again, so just to share with you the experience there, BMW was coming with their new car. Do you remember the model, Alex? I just forgot the model.
It's i8, isn't it? It's the electric one. Boris is in love with it, as we found out.
And people from the foundation get it for free, right?
There you go. They get a drive for free. So Mark McLean was boasting that he was driving for part of it. So yes.
So it was,
I don't think they can keep it.
We're actually driving the car on stage and went out of the car, and BMW presented how they're using and adopting OpenStack to actually design the new models and new cars, which is impressive, not just through that nice gimmick, but you could actually see again the statement when we're saying that people are adopting it for innovation, what it actually means, because it sounds like a big word. It means that if you want to design a car like i8, you want to have an infrastructure to support it, and you want to have control over the infrastructure, and that's really what it means. And you can't really just, and all of those features, whether it's high performance storage, high performance network, means something to those people, and they need that level of control. If I go to one of the elements in the user survey that talks about it, what do you think?
I don't know what to do. It's not working. They're not seeing it.
Like that maybe, and we'll just move.
Raphael, are the slides okay now? I apologize for the logistical issues.
Yeah, sure. So we see the slides in a bigger resolution right now, so it works better.
Is it okay now?
No, it's just jumping back again to 2 slides on 1 page.
Keep it in non-presentation mode. Maybe.
So sorry guys who are joining us online for the inconvenience. We're working on that in the background.
Can you work with this?
Yeah, I'll work with it.
Are you guys okay with this? I apologize.
What's good now?
Okay. Oh, you guys are good now? We just see it the way that you saw it before, but it's okay. We'll
Perfect.
manage.
It's perfect now. Thank you very much.
Over here, so it's okay.
Okay. So the statistic shows really the level of adoption of OpenStack in production, and I think that statistics shows that it's actually moving. There is a lot of companies already running in production. I think that's the main thing. The other thing that I haven't included in the slide itself is how many people are moving to the latest version, and that's and again I think Alex has a better insight into that, and feel free to jump into here. But what we've seen is also the people are running mostly iSouth and Rana, and are relatively quickly adopting new versions of OpenStack. There is new features, by the way, and a very important focus on upgrades. So the idea is that in order to move to new releases, it will be much easier and faster. And again, Alex, I think, has a much better position to talk about how people are adopting new releases in OpenStack. Alex.
There's one question from. Sorry, go ahead, Alex.
Well, I'll just comment on this. What Nati is saying, that what we're seeing is that OpenStack still doesn't have the automatic upgrade process, although patching is becoming a possibility and pieces of OpenStack can get upgraded. So it's still a manual process, but I guess coming to release 6 or in the K, this problem is going to become a lot easier solved. But today it's a manual process where you just have to migrate your loads by installing a new version of OpenStack side by side. So typically what happens is new customers who come on board, they go with the latest, and those who are running in production, they typically lag a little bit, but most customers try to actually not sit in what's called franking clouds and try to get to supported ones and then upgrade fairly quickly. So, but I think from what we're seeing is we have a much larger number of people in the proof of concept territory, and that number is growing rapidly, than people who are doing dev and QA. This is by far the prevalent use case. And then production, it works better on the net new, and then the traditional enterprise loads are still kind of lagging. And there is a larger story because OpenStack is moving from being all about infrastructure to all about workloads. And if we as the community are interested in massive OpenStack adoption, we need to solve the workload problem. We need to make sure that we can easily move workloads in and out of OpenStack, and that problem is really easy. And that's where the conversations are mostly happening now. which wasn't the case even 6 months ago.
Nati, there's one question from the audience. What is the source of the data that you are using in your presentation?
I'll give all the references. All the references are included in the slides themselves, so when we share the slides, you'll get all the references. And by the way, this slide is from the user survey that was done by the foundation. Again, there is a link to that in the references section in this presentation. Well, so you talked about NFV quite substantially, so I'm not going to repeat that. But again, the important thing is this is an entire industry. We're not just talking about just performance features in OpenStack. We're talking about an industry that want to move faster and compete with Amazon and compete with Google, and they realize that they need a tool to actually build that, and they're not at the position of Google or Amazon to actually build their own infrastructure and build their own cloud, especially if they want to move fast. And that's where OpenStack becomes very handy. The fact that it's open source and community-based allows them to actually influence the community. So previously, when people brought OpenStack, and I'm talking about 2 summits even before, people were looking at NFV and said, NFV what? And no one really even knew what people meant. Then there was discussion in the last summit in Atlanta about it, and that's where I think the NFV group was founded. And you could see how quickly such a feedback from an industry gets implemented into projects. And in my view, that's the main thing to note about it, not just the technical features here. And I'll skip that slide because I think they talked about the features. Another thing that I'm seeing here, and again, Alex, you could note about it if you're seeing the same thing, is that there is a lot of activities from a standardization perspective to actually include Tosca as part of that NFV initiative, because at the end of the day, you need a standard way to define those devices and to define the topology of application. And when Alex mentioned the move towards workload, Tosca is all about workload. Tosca is really not just like Heat, which is focused on infrastructure automation. It really talks about topologies, dependencies, policies, all the things that sit on top of the infrastructure itself. And what you can see here is the list of companies that are embracing Tosca already, are part of the Tosca group. And Tosca itself, and that's another interesting change here, both in the organization itself. Before that, in Oasis, which is, by the way, the organization behind Tosca and the organization behind XML and other things that we've been using in XML, was moving through a spec. And they were defining specs. And people were sitting in the room defining specs and expecting vendors to implement them. They realized that the level of adoption, if you define a spec that the industry will adopt it, is not that great because there is a huge gap. And the iteration cycles between someone who's actually taking a spec, implementing it, and finding that it's missing things until the committee take it back was too long, and that's why we haven't seen too much adoption of Tosca in its earlier version. The thing that happened here is that the people in Tosca realized that, and now they plugged into the community itself, and actually there is a Tosca group within the Heat project that is working very closely to the community. And the main change that I've seen, and that's part of the explanation why Tosca is becoming more popular today than it was before, is because of that iteration cycle. When we're working within a community, when there is users who are actually using it and giving you the feedback, the iteration cycles are faster. You as a user have the highest chance to get something that is actually working. That's the other things. And I think that changed the landscape of how startups are being adopted. Startups are being adopted not as specs, they're being adopted through code, to users that are actually using it, and those users would actually define the spec, not users who just write specs. And Alex, I'm sure you have comments about that.
Yes. So let me add some color here from the other angle that we're coming from. Of course, and there was also a question from the audience that was also related to that. And as many of you know, there is a project that we are sponsoring, but it's much larger than Mirantis now in the community. Project called Murano, and the idea is to add some dynamic orchestration on top of Heat. And it's a project that's been going on now for probably over a year, and it's getting to the point where it's getting fairly mature, and it's getting interesting traction in the community to the point where the mission of Glance was actually changed from just an image repository to an artifact repository as a way to keep the application catalog pieces in there. And of course, Heat is also collaborating very much with Murano. So originally Murano was developed its own DSL as a way to to build the application workflows. And one of the challenges that we had in the incubation discussions is that everybody wanted to see Tosca as a standard way, and because it was moving a little bit slower, we still implemented our own DSL, our own language, as part of Murano standard language. But there is a number of blueprints for Tosca, which is going to be a standard as a requirement for this to become part of a greater community. So this is, again, confirmation of what Nati is saying, that the OpenStack community is embracing Tosca across the board, and also the answer to some of the questions about potentially collaborating between Murano, Cloudify, and other community members. So there is, we have those conversations with Nati, and we're looking at ways to get Cloudify and Murano closer, but also for the general community, there are many blueprints. For example, helping us implement Tosca is something that we'll welcome. So this is, again, this will help OpenStack to move up the stack to actually deal with workload problems, not just infrastructure, and it's very applicable in the enterprise space as well as the NFV space.
Good points. Just to share with you, I had my own take there, and I was actually talking about it. Again, the link to that, I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but there is a link we show some interesting demo there, basically showing how you could actually run on OpenStack your own Skype. So think about you're a startup and you want to create a Skype-based service or a video service. It will only take you a click to build a production-ready environment. That's where it goes when you're managing workload, as Alex mentioned. And you could get to that point because a lot of the things that you're actually doing today to build production environments can be scripted, can be automated, can be described. And once we're covering the network and storage and all those basic elements, that's where we're getting. And I think that's an important point. With that, I'll point to the next point, which is actually a big contribution by Mirantis. So again, Alex, feel free to jump in. So when Said mentioned that there is a new addition of Sahara into Horizon, that's how it looks like. Basically, you can't really see it because it's a small image. But again, there is a link to the project. There is actually a link to Mirantis slots and video that walk you through how Sahara works, and you could actually walk through that and see what it means. There is a new tab here, which in my view, it's a very interesting addition that really brings OpenStack a big step further towards workload, as Alex mentioned. So Alex, do you want to touch on the status of that project?
Sahara. So Sahara is something we started, again, about a year and a half ago when we realized that one of the large use cases for any cloud would be to run dynamic Hadoop loads, data analytics loads, and Hadoop is very naturally compatible with the cloud. Not just because not because Hadoop wants to run on a virtualized environment, but it can be optimized to almost with no performance degradation. But those kinds of loads are elastic by nature, and you want to run them in a multi-tenant environment and orchestrate those things natively, because you can have a very, very large cluster, and you can have departments that would want to use this cluster for periods of time. And the native Hadoop that you run on bare metal just cannot do that. So we kind of saw that need, and we started a project called Savannah at the time. That was very timely because when we started it, Hortonworks and Red Hat immediately supported us, and as a result, it became a great collaborative effort in the community. And within two cycles, Sahara that was renamed Savannah, that was renamed into Sahara for copyright reasons, became first integrated and then incubated, so it's now part of the core. And in the June release, this is actually something that the foundation considers one of the main new features of OpenStack, and so this is actually highlighted by the foundation. It's becoming usable to the point where there's a number of use cases of Hadoop on Sahara, and we think that this is, as data continues to grow and analytics continues to expand, this could be one of the large use cases for OpenStack adoption as that grows.
Yeah, and I can actually see that combined with the improvement in the storage space and the network space, actually people building specialized OpenStack implementation for those type of workloads. So this is basically, again, for those who are not familiar with that, this is how it works. I'm not going to go through the details of that, but the interesting thing is that it does integrate with Heat, and it does use Heat. I think that's a new modification to that. I'm not sure if it's that new, but it wasn't that in the beginning. There was some discussion about it, and you can see that there is still a lot of functionality around it to actually map between the actual workload itself, which is in this case big data. For example, how do you set policy for affinity, anti-affinity? How do you build different workload like Spark, which is real-time streaming, and workload which are more batch-oriented like MapReduce? And how do you plug in other frameworks into that mix? So there's a lot of functionality that is not just infrastructure orchestration, which I think also emphasizes the fact that there is multiple level of orchestration that we're expecting to see. One level of orchestration which is infrastructure orchestration, and the other one which is more workload oriented. And each product in itself, for example, in the case of Hadoop, there is its own orchestration, the new orchestration with Hadoop 2, as it is called, that actually does its own cluster management. So that's another point to understand here, and that's also something that I think is part of the maturity of the community is to realize that, because at the beginning it was like everything is it, and you have to map everything to it. I think they started to realize that if you want to embrace innovation, you have to think of orchestration at different levels differently, and that's why we're seeing different projects taking specific, if you like, orchestration tasks based on the workload that they're designed to. And that's, in my view, another view to look into that. Would you agree with that, Alex?
I do, and again, this is also what's important is this is led from the OpenStack innovation, because the other alternative is to just use Hadoop's own, in this particular case, Hadoop's own orchestrators that come with Hortonworks or Clouderas or like, and that is kind of counter direction from the whole idea of vendor agnosticism, where you build an interface which is standard, and then others can build plugins into that. So this approach again is consistent with building a very, very vendor agnostic stack that people can use for innovation interchangeably. This is very important to avoid vendor lock-in, which is one of the large reasons OpenStack is selected in the first place.
So there's new features that was coming with that project in Juno release. I'm not going to dive into that for sake of time, and I see that the people are starting to be exhausted a little bit, so for feeling a little bit pity about them, I'll skip over that slide. And again, there is a reference to that with a video that covers all the features and all the new releases. You could go walk through that and just see that for yourself. And again, just a pointer. I'm not going to go through all the case studies, but interestingly enough, one of the OpenStack has the super user blogs and commentary, which is very useful. So if you want to follow what happens in events, what happens in other cases, I would recommend that you would register or subscribe to that and see. Those are the 4 most popular sessions they picked up. Again, the reference to each of the posts is linked here. Also, the links to the blog that summarize each one of them. I felt that the one that at least caught my eye was the ability to actually use Docker in the Italy media company. And they were using a combination of OpenStack and Docker, and that again touches also on the thing that we discussed about workloads to optimize the I/O operations. And in their case, it's something that maps into the business, not just agility, but cost, because they, as a media company, they do run a lot of videos and they do run a lot of those media files. And if you do that on, just standard storage mechanism, you'll end up with a much lower utilization and therefore much higher cost. So for them, using Docker in a combination with, and I'll talk about Docker in a second, in combination with OpenStack was pretty big. Also, BBVA was an interesting use case. They actually presented a keynote there and other sessions. Again, that's talking about an industry like a bank, not necessarily an investment bank like JP Morgan and all those type of things, an average bank, I would say, that is adopting something like OpenStack, and that's non-trivial thing to see. And I think that's also, in my view, indicative of the level of organization that are actually adopting it. And I would really recommend you to go into those links and watch those case studies yourself. Again, for the sake of time, I think you could all read that, and I think the general message is that OpenStack is progressing pretty fast. There is more updates and so forth. I'm not going to go through the numbers here. And that's kind of the thing that I do want to spend more time on. How people are actually using OpenStack, and I'm not sure why that slide got truncated, but I'll fill in the gap here. So there is every release there is a user survey. The user survey, and that's one thing that I like about OpenStack is that you don't have the middleman. So for example, when I use Amazon or when I use other clouds, they would send you reports or tell you how big they are and how much people are using this and this and this feature, but you don't really know how the users that are using Amazon are using it. For what? And that's important for product release. That's important for planning. That's important for knowing where to invest. And one thing that you get out of a community is that you don't have that middleman. You could go and access directly the users, and the community will give you access to that information without any filtering. That's a very important thing. Yes, go ahead.
Nati, I'll add some color to this. So the way community is doing it is it has its own mailing list, but then it also goes to all the members and ask them to reach out directly to all of their customers and their mailing lists and ask them to participate in the user survey. So I know they used my personal email from that, and I sent out, I think, like 30,000 solicitations to the people asking them to participate in this. And according to Jonathan, I mean, they have it linked where it came from. I think, easily 2,000 people ended up responding to this just based on that. So, and we don't know what those people responded, but this is the level of transparency. I'm sure that Red Hat folks and Canonical folks and everybody else, have done something very similar. I don't even know. I got about 1,000 out of the office replies automatically that I had to delete.
So you have a authority on 2,000 people in that case, which is
well, I'm not sure about authority, but about 2,000 people decided it's important enough to respond. I'm not sure it's because of Mirantis' email or because they just want to make sure that they're heard. But this is the transparency that this community has, which is really awesome. We're completely uninterested in keeping this information to ourselves.
Yeah, and going with the stats itself, a couple of things that, when you analyze stats in general, usually you look at the high numbers and you analyze them. And actually, in my view, that's a mistake. Actually, a lot of the interesting information is in the low number or middle range numbers, which indicates a trend that is moving to become those high numbers. And when you look at the statistics and numbers, you very quickly can pass them in one way or the other. So what I tried here is actually to highlight things that are not that trivial for users who would read that themselves, and hopefully with that insight you get some insights of things that are less trivial to pass from all those numbers, and that's also a comment to the survey itself. So one thing that I got out of this numbers is that you can see that if you summarize all the people that are running on either hosted, public, or hybrid, people that are usually thinking of OpenStack as a private cloud thing, all of a sudden you could see that a lot of them are willing or open to actually run in production in a non-private environment, whether it's hosted, whether it's public or hybrid. That's less important. It's non-private. That I think is important. And for me, that's also a sign of maturity, of something that is different than what I anticipated, what I even thought of. And I know that now there is a new trend, and actually Mirantis was the first to announce it, of having a hosted OpenStack, which means that in one click you could get OpenStack on a private hosted OpenStack, which means that it's not multi-tenant OpenStack, like in Amazon, you actually have control of the infrastructure. You can do everything that you want, and that's a much simpler way to spawn your new OpenStack environment. You don't own the computers, but other than that, you own the entire stack of OpenStack itself. And Alex, maybe you could put some words about what you're doing in that space.
Well, yes, you're referring to what we call Mirantis OpenStack Express, and indeed, we, I think, beat a couple of other vendors just by a couple of weeks. I think since Rackspace have announced the same thing, and then I think our friends from Seattle, Blue Box, I think, are doing the same thing. So this is indeed becoming a trend. But basically, the reason we did it is because there are two general reasons why we kind of looked at this. One is we're looking at the adoption numbers, and we're realizing that if you look at the general trends, then OpenStack, and if you look at the analyst reports, by 2018, about 60% of the $3.8 billion that OpenStack is going to be about is going to be consumed as a service, right? So no matter which way you do it, you got to have, as part of your asset base, you got to have an ability to offer OpenStack as a service, to your customer base. And then what we're discovering is that there's many multiple uses where OpenStack as a service is a lot more convenient way to increase adoption. And I'll give you some simple use cases. So, for example, there's a number of third-party vendors that are building infrastructure, and to have an ability to just have an OpenStack to test and dev, and then offer development environments and integration environments to the customers integrating to your stuff it's very important to have control of the full hardware, but owning that hardware is not that important. And having just OpenStack with a development environment and your stuff in it that you can replicate worldwide is just a wonderful way to help integrate with all the infrastructure vendors. There are developers who just want to develop a native OpenStack, and just having that is a great way. And finally, there are some people who have POCs and some use cases where they want to try OpenStack in proof of concept pre-production. And if those are large enterprises, the challenges that they have is that provisioning hardware, getting the data center ready is a huge undertaking. Can take 6 months and can take a lot of money. And sometimes those use cases they can run much faster, especially if those use cases are application driven. Then they can just run it on native OpenStack, and by the time they're ready to put it on-prem, they've already gotten their proof points, and they could just do it automatically. So it creates new ways for OpenStack adoption, and I think this is very important because the more things we can do to help people adopt OpenStack, the faster the ecosystem will grow. So that's why we did it.
Exactly. And we're seeing similar use cases where we want to launch a POC, for example, ad hoc POC, and the customer doesn't have the environment yet ready, and this way we can bypass a lot of those obstacles. So it really helps also on the dev and even sales cycle of OpenStack. The other thing that I found, again, this is a great example where looking at the middle numbers is actually more important than looking at the high numbers. And if you really do the math here, you'll see that 30% of the users are using OpenStack with non-hypervisors. This is big in market. This is huge. Again, a year ago, it wouldn't even come close to that, and no one would even if you would even say something like that, people would think that you're a lunatic or something. So that's big, and in my view, that marks a big trend, and I'm hearing it more and more. Of the fact that people are adopting containers and Dockers and bare metal. Those three are new. And by the way, they are very unique to OpenStack. And that's another thing to look at OpenStack, not just as is in a catch-up mode with all other clouds. It's actually innovating in places where none of the other clouds are able to innovate yet. Or would even have much slower pace to innovate in those areas. So just try to imagine what it will take to all other clouds to try and provision bare metal, or to move from VM virtualization into something like Docker. They will do that, but it's nice to see that in OpenStack we are able to offer those type of services faster than others. Alex?
Well, Yes, so I will comment there. So, Nati, you're right, but the way to get Docker containers working on bare metal through Nova is not optimally done. So there are discussions about, shouldn't there be some other compute projects that would actually accommodate native Docker containers better than what Nova does today, and have it under a compute program. And unless we do it right, that's a stern word of warning, unless we do it right, there will be a large number of use cases that will choose to run their workloads without any IIS and without OpenStack in particular. And it's in our best interest to find the best way to make Docker the first-class citizen in OpenStack and go a long way of doing this, because not accommodating them correctly will cause this whole ecosystem to move off of OpenStack. I mean, there is a huge advantage of using Docker with OpenStack, because Docker is just one type of a workload, native Docker container. I mean, you can put it inside the VM, but then you lose all the advantages of having native containers. But so if they work as well within OpenStack as they would without, then you can take all the advantages of having the single control plane for both your VMs and your containers, and having multi-tenancy in some cases, and not having multi-tenancy where it's not necessary. And then there is a tremendous benefit to all by having OpenStack. But unless we make it such that running it under OpenStack with the compute program is as efficient as running it on bare metal directly, we will lose this community. And these are the discussions we're having, in the foundation, that they're looking for people to actually majorly invest in that. This is, if not done right, it's actually a threat to OpenStack. But if done right, it's a great boon, and it's on us to make sure we do it right.
It's an excellent point, and I'm very happy that I brought you to this call just for this open letter to the community. So I think that my takeaway from what Alex just said is that this voice is heard, and people are looking into that. And as I've seen in previous experience, NFV was an example for that that I mentioned before. Those voices are not being ignored, and those voices, I'm sure, will find their way into OpenStack implementation. At least I'm optimistic about that. And me and Alex had a discussion within Paris about the concern about that, and I had a lot of discussion here even within GigaSpaces about that. We do see that trend. People want something efficient and simple, and not necessarily 100% compatible with Amazon or something like that. And there are many use cases in which you would, especially if you're looking at continuous deployment, as an example, in which it will be good enough for most use cases, and it will be much more lightweight and efficient, and we need to think about that use case as well. Other things to note is, again, for the sake of time, I'll run through that very quickly, so I'll get to the kind of the summary of that. But one point that I wanted to mention here is, and I think kind of touches on what I mentioned before, is that we're starting to see new kids in the block here in the configuration space. In this case, we could see Ansible. It wasn't actually there before, but you can see that the number in production in this case of Ansible is actually bigger than Chef. And Chef has been there for a while, and so the dominancy of Chef and Puppet, as they are right now, are being challenged by those new guys, new kids in the block, as I would call them, and not just Ansible. I'll reference the Docker in that context in just one slide. So you can also see that basically, if you're looking at application orchestration versus the previous slide was talking about managing OpenStack resources themselves. How do you run OpenStack? So obviously, in that case, configuration manager still has a play. Even though I've seen already a use case in which, for example, Red Hat are using Docker to even run OpenStack itself. So I think we'll see a change. I'm sure we'll see a change in that space as well later on, which could be a much simpler way to run OpenStack in general. We're seeing a very similar trend here with regard to application orchestration, software orchestration. So these are the things that sit on top of OpenStack. That's why they are colored in a different color here. And what you can see is the use of tools, even though Puppet is very popular in both options, we could see new kind of tools. So people are not using the same tool to run their OpenStack environment, then they use the tools to run their application on top of OpenStack. And that's another thing to note. It's actually very different, again, excluding Puppet, which I think is very, very unique to OpenStack. But if you look at other clouds, you'll see very, very similar trends. And if I go to the last slide here, and what we could see is also the adoption of the fact that if we really look at the interoperability call here, is that even though you would think that most OpenStack users would think of only OpenStack, and in the community this is in many cases a discussion, like let's worry about getting OpenStack there, and let's worry about other things are less important for users, which are different than the developers that are developing OpenStack. For users, it is important. One, because they do see risks in the future, and they don't want to bet in one, and they've been in that movie before. Second, it's practicality. If you look at the public cloud space, you would see that most of the public space is dominated by Google, by Amazon, by Azure, and not OpenStack things, so they do need that level of interoperability. And even within OpenStack, most people that move to OpenStack move from VMware to OpenStack, or some other environment into OpenStack, and in most cases it would be VMware, and they can't really do that switch in one day. So right now they're running in two silos. They run two separate environments and completely different tools, completely different language. So VMware has done one thing to ease that work by supporting OpenStack on top of VMware, but there is other things that needs to be done there to support that. And I know that Alex, you have some thoughts about that as well, and this will be our closing remark as well.
Yes. So my 2 cents there is I believe that ability to move to and from all the clouds is key for the adoption. But the way I would like to see OpenStack community deal with this is to have in the community a community-maintained compatibility layer as a project, let's say in StackForge, that could move into the big tent idea that is being discussed, where the northbound API for all the clouds remains OpenStack. And then we do a really good job maintaining API level compatibility with the other clouds. The reason for that, because a lot of people are suggesting different ways. They say, Amazon is the standard, so let's kind of have the Amazon be the northbound and then deal with that. My thinking is that it's better to have OpenStack as the northbound API for everybody, because this is the only API that's non-proprietary. It's actually controlled by the community. People can actually affect it, and all the other APIs, no matter how good they are, they're controlled by the vendors, and that makes them, the community is a lot more vulnerable. And so I've used that argument with a number of customers, and people kind of like this idea. And I think, again, if as a community we make this really successful, it will get adopted. It will really, really, really make OpenStack the ultimate control plane via the APIs of all the computing that happens around. And that will be a huge win for the OpenStack community. So this is a big one as well.
Yep, excellent point. And I think, again, this is a still very heated discussion within the community itself. And I think what we're echoing here is the voices, both of users that are reported in this report, but also I think the desire from someone in the community of where the OpenStack should be going. And I think that's also in itself a sign for maturity. I think with that we'll conclude. I think we've had some references, enough references here and enough information here. The references will be in the slides. I somehow missed them in this presentation. So Rafael, are there any questions from the audience?
There are no further questions from the audience, and thank you all very much for joining us, Alex from Paris, Nati, and Syed from Israel. Well, actually, there's one question that is popping up very frequently. Are the slides going to be available? Yes, we will share both the slides as well as the recorded online meetup within the next few days.
I see a question here for me. This is Alex. And this question is, the chairperson is typing it up. It says, after new funding of Mirantis, any plans to open an R&D center in Israel? So, the plans to open an R&D center in Israel actually have been in the works for a while now. And the way we've been opening R&D centers have been fairly opportunistic. We've been able to embrace teams of people who seem to have a passion for a certain area that is important. So I'll give you an example. We have an office in Poznan, Poland. The reason we have an office in Poznan, Poland is because many years ago, well, by OpenStack terms, and we're looking about 3.5 years ago, we found a gentleman by the name of Piotr who was really passionate about OpenStack and who was interested in helping us in certain projects in Europe. And we liked him so much that we said we're going to relocate him to California. So he agreed, only to find out that his wife had, they were planning to have their third baby, and his wife at the last moment said that she is not going to leave with the new baby away from the rest of the family. And yet the gentleman was so impressive that we just couldn't lose him. And we said, well, we can't lose him. What can we do? And he said, well, if you like me, I have another 4 guys just like me, and I can build an office of 5 people in Poznan. And we said, okay. So that was 3 years ago, and maybe 2.5 years ago. And today it's an office of 50 people and one of the most fast, rapidly growing office within Mirantis. So we have just opened a small office in France because there was a group of people that separated from Boole who were OpenStack aficionados who felt really passionate about the operations part of OpenStack, and so we embraced them, and that's our French office. And we have something in Australia and the like. So I have mentioned a couple of areas that we're passionate about around community, around building API compatibility and the like. And so all that we are interested in is actually published. With the new funding, we're about to double our engineering investment both in the product and in the community. So if you have groups who feel passionate about something that I've mentioned and you're in Israel, reach out, and that may be our new office. So that's how it works.
So I sense, Alex, that you're moving here as well, right?
Yes, I'm sure I will be, sooner or later. It's always a pleasure to come to Israel.
You're more than welcome.
Pleasure to have you.
As a closing remark, I did want to mention that we're hiring as well, but the important thing for me really...
didn't want to steal any people from the companies that are, we're all a community here, so no hostile moves at all.
I saw them just, logging into LinkedIn right now as we speak. So anyway, one thing that I wanted to get, maybe Rafael, you could moderate that, is feedback. This is the first online meetup that we're doing jointly, as a physical meetup and online. And we're new into that, we probably experienced. And we do want to get some feedback, so how to improve next, and feedback if that works, if that doesn't work, if it's broken, should we continue that, should we do more of that? Those type of things. Shalom, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, you can definitely do both. You can comment. There's an option to rate the meetup. You can definitely put your comments there if you don't want to, if you want to take it offline. And in the online meetup, you can comment there as well. We'll be monitoring those comments, and we'll definitely try to improve. And if you like it, we'll try to continue.
Excellent. So for me, it was a pleasure experience. Rafael, I really wanted to thank you for coordinating that and setting it up and jumping on that very quickly. So thank you very much.
And Alex as well.
Thank you very much, guys.
Really
all right, thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. So enjoy, guys, your pizza and beer in Israel. I guess that you're getting to this part right now.